In this Northern Brewer video, a deep dive into Irish Extra Stout, the classic Irish beer style similar to Dry Irish Stout, but with a bit more of everything going on. An East Coast Pro-Am brew team walks us through a winning homebrew recipe that was scaled up for a professional brew house. Hey everyone, it's Chip Walton. I'm here at Northern Brewer HQ. Happy St. Patrick's Day weekend. For the special occasion, I have for you an interview excerpt from our most recently released Northern Brewer University online video course. This one is part of the Brewing to Style series, focused specifically on Irish ales. In the full class, we take a look at the style guidelines and brewing process for 3 of our Irish beer kits: Irish Blonde Ale, Irish Red Ale, and Dry Irish Stout. And we get pro tips from craft brewers on these styles. And because we don't currently have a beer kit representing the Irish Extra Stout style, I thought it would be helpful for the class if we talked to someone who has become very familiar with the style lately in order to guide us through brewing a really good example at home. Brooks Edman is a home brewer from Stewartstown, Pennsylvania, and Ryan Foltz is the head brewer at Poor Man's Brewing Company in Ephrata, Pennsylvania. I talked with them about Lucy's Irish Extra Stout, a recipe that started in Brooks's home, won Judge's Choice at a beer festival, and was then stepped up for pro-size production at Ryan's Brewery. This includes insightful conversation about blending different roasted barley malts, which is something you don't often hear about, plus other mash and fermentation techniques for drying the beer out for that classic finish and mouthfeel. Before we get into it, the homebrew recipe for Lucy's Irish Extra Stout is available for download in the video description below. So why don't you go ahead and grab that, have it accessible as we get into this conversation with Ryan and Brooks. We're here with Ryan Foltz, Poor Man's Brewing. We're here with Brooks Edman, amateur brewer, kind of pro-amateur brewer at this point. This is the first time we've ever had kind of one of these pro-am partnerships featured in an NBU class. So this is unique and super fun. Thanks to you both for being here. Let me just raise a glass super quick. Cheers. Turn it over to Brooks. Let's talk about this beer as a homebrew recipe inspiration. First off, who's this? Who's this cutie pie? Who's Lucy?
That is actually Lucy. She was a beloved cat of mine and my wife's. She's not around anymore, but I still brew this beer. This is probably the recipe I've brewed the most, mostly because, St. Patrick's Day comes up. You got to have some Irish Stout on tap. So, I brewed it, I think, probably my first year of home brewing. Went super traditional with it. Started out kind of more on the just a straight, dry Irish Stout kind of recipe. But through the years, kind of I like a little more roast in there. And then I started doing competitions. And the judges don't like a little more roast in that style. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to beef up, the alcohol a little bit and make it an extra stout where that pronounced kind of roast, a little bit of dark chocolate kind of thing is a little more acceptable. And then, it did fairly well, like with that. I still brewed it to my taste, not so much, the style. So where the recipe that we actually brewed at Poor Man's, the way that came about was I was brewing my yearly batch and I accidentally got the wrong brand roasted barley. And it was a much lighter Lovabond, surprisingly much lighter than what I had been using. It was the US versus a UK brand. And the beer was just lighter brown and a little lighter on the roast. And, it's what I had on tap. So I put it in some competitions and it actually scored better than I had before. And I was like, oh, interesting. And it got into the first round of NHC. It won first place in the first round of NHC. So I was like, huh. So I did a rebrew for the finals. And instead of going just straight with that lighter Lovabond roasted barley, I blended it half and half with the UK brand that I've been using, which I think the US brand was around 300 love and the UK was around between 5 and 6. I think it usually says 525 or something. And I blended it, and that I like that. I thought that was great. It scored well, didn't medal in the finals of NHC. It scored well, but having that second batch this past year, I had some when the Lidditz competition was coming up, and that's a 2-rounder as well. You submit it, it's like a normal BJC comp, and then the top 10 get to go on and pour at the Lidditz Craft Beer Festival. So submitted it to that. got in the top 10. I'm pretty excited. I mean, beers that go into that competition usually, when you go to pour at a festival, people are, going after the, more exotic, like fruited this and sour and whatever. And I'd actually been in the competition before with beer like that. So I was like, oh man, like an Irish Extra Stout, I don't really know that that's going to be like doing so great there. But it got second place crowd choice, and Ryan picked it to brew at Poor Man's, and I was super excited. So yeah, I mean, I brewed it, I think, including the Poor Man's batch. I think I brewed this beer 5 times last year, just having to do brew, rebrew, and then pro brew.
And on paper, it's kind of the trifecta, right, that make up these dry Irish stouts or these kind of more slightly amped up Irish extras. It's your base malt, in your case, Maris Otter, flake barley, and then what would have been just roast barley, but in your case, it's kind of this like fun split of those two. Real quick, before we talk about the pro version, Irish ale yeast is what you list in the recipe we're sharing with folks. Kind of talk to me real quick about how much you like that, or if you've used other yeast, which ones work, or just off the top of your dome, which ones might kind of make a different twist on the beer.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the recipe is super traditional, like you said, nothing fancy. Base malt, flake barley, roasted barley. That's kind of how they do it. And then the Irish extras is a little amped up. So the Irish ale yeast, I typically use that. It sometimes can be hard to get because I think it's just a yeast that doesn't get used year round. It gets used kind of once a year. So the shops get it and they sell out of it because everybody's trying to brew their Irish stout. So there have been times, but I mean, well, to speak on the Irish ale yeast, I like it. It's a great yeast. I'd love to try it in some other beers, but it ferments quick, ferments clean. It drops, super clear, super quick. And it's just a super like dependable. I've never had an issue with it. I mean, the only issue I've had is getting it some couple times, and I found that a British ale yeast is a good substitute. I think maybe the only difference being sometimes the British ale yeast, you can kind of get that little more pronounced like fruity ester kind of a thing. I don't know how much of that comes through like with the extra stout because you got a lot of roast from the the dark malt, but if I ever brewed it side by side, I'd like maybe maybe you could taste the difference. But I've used the Safel SO4 in it, and I think what did we use, Ryan? London or something like that?
That was basically the equivalent of O4, just a different brand.
Yeah. So, and that's another that yeast behave. I went with that because like I've used it in other recipes and it's behaved kind of the same way. It ferments real fast. It's pretty clean. And it drops, clear pretty quickly. Yeah, like maybe there's a little bit more of a kind of a fruity ester thing that might pop up in it, but I think it works well in the style. And if there is that fruity ester thing, I kind of think it might blend with those dark malts really well. Like and it's hard to say. Never having maybe that's a project for the future. Brew it side by side and do SO4 and Irish ale and see if I can actually perceive a difference. But it's pretty spot on the version we brewed with the London ale yeast.
So which brings us to the pro version of this Pro-Am joint. Ryan, tell us a little bit about why you picked this beer at the Lidditz comp, and then kind of your thoughts as you wrapped your head around scaling it up, especially considering that you're fairly a lager house, right? This is not necessarily a beer that's on your tap board a lot.
Yeah, we brew almost all lager. We brew 2 Belgian beers a year, like a saison in the summer, and we brew a quad in the winter. And then aside from that, everything else is lager. So when we help judge that initial first round to pick the 10 that go to the judge to be picked by like People's Choice at the competition. So this year we helped organize it. So I didn't taste nearly as many beers at the judging as normal because I was kind of more just facilitating. But I did taste this in the first round and enjoyed it there. So I kind of had like a little bit of a pre-perceived, like I know there's going to be at least this one beer that I had that I liked. So it was kind of top of my radar going into the competition. And then, there was one lager submitted. And then there was a lot of styles that like typically wouldn't fit our wheelhouse. And even though this was an ale style, it's a drier beer, it's more, malt forward. it's something that we felt like we try to pick beers that fit our wheelhouse, because we made the mistake in the past of like, okay, this beer is really cool, we should brew it, but it's not something that we typically do, and then it typically starts to stray from what the homebrew version tasted like, because it's just not something we do all the time. So we're conscious of that and try to make sure we pick something that we think we can, execute and not disappoint the homebrewer and like not do a good representation. And a lot of it comes down to like we'd wait to talk to the homebrewers at the competition and be like, do you want to genuinely brew, a brewer's choice, and like would that be something that you'd be excited about? And like, are you available to come out on a weekday? And like I could tell just from talking to Brooks for like 2 minutes that it was going to be a fun 8-hour day together, and the beer was going to turn out, I think, pretty similar to what he was hoping for. So it was a good fit for everybody.
And you did the split with the roast barley, right? You followed the roadmap.
We did, yeah. The only thing we had to change, and Brooks, correct me if I'm wrong from memory, but the only thing we had to change, I think, was the yeast. I think we ended up having to get a different brand of maris otter, if I remember right, because I forget if you were using.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think we ended up getting Baird's is what we ended up using for the maris otter. I think was the only like grain difference, and then obviously the yeast we got English ale yeast, because I was trying to. We have another brewery in town that brews like 2 Irish beers on a rotation, but they're not like super fast sellers, and they brew them in 30-barrel batches. So I was trying to time it to bum English or Irish ale yeast from them, but it didn't work out. So we ended up just getting English ale yeast.
So yeah, let's talk about the taste in the glass. What do you guys what do you think of it? What has the crowd response been since it's been on tap and in cans?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty spot on. Like, if I had this next to mine that I brewed at home, I think I'd have a pretty tough time, discerning between the two. And like I said, I brewed that recipe a lot, so I know that beer really well. And we pretty much follow. They thankfully, followed everything within that recipe the way I did it. So yeah, I mean, it turned out great. I do the free rise thing as well, like at the end of fermentation, just because I really like to dry the beer out as much as possible. I also it's just a random thing in my process. Sometimes I found I wasn't getting that attenuation with this recipe, so I've started doing just a little bit of amylase enzyme in the mash, which for me helps get it down. We didn't do that on the Pro Brew version, but it's just their process, their system, different. Who knows? So I really like to push that kind of dryness, even though it's the extra, But like I said, I do the extra because I like that. It's got that roast coffee, like that kind of almost dark chocolate kind of thing, like you don't want it to get into that like sweet chocolate, like English stouts are a little more on the sweeter side and a little more full bodied. To me, it's like I'm a big time coffee drinker, and usually it's I need to drink my coffee right away, so a lot of times I grab an iced coffee just so I can fire it into my body as fast as possible. But that's what it is for me. It's that like iced coffee, like nice, dark, roasty, little bit of bitterness kind of even from that roast. And a little bit of dark chocolate, and just super dry so that you can keep, it's 6.1, but I don't really think it drinks like that. It drinks kind of lighter than that to me.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely has a very light, dry finish that makes you go pretty quick in for another sip.
Sure. Yeah, and it's sold really well for us. We brewed a 10-barrel batch. We wholesaled some of it, and then most of it's been through the tap room. But I want to say, I just ran back to grab a can of it. I want to say we only have a handful of cases left, and I think we're down to like 1 or 2 kegs left that are here in backup. So we probably have a couple. Our brewery and tap room are 2 different buildings, so we have a couple down here. There's probably a couple at the brewery still, but it's moved pretty quick.
So it won't be around for St. Patrick's Day, it sounds like.
Probably not. It all depends. Like if we have a Doppelbock coming out next week, and I'm guessing that'll probably take a little heat off of this, because people tend to start hitting the Doppelbock once it gets really cold. So that'll probably slow this down a little bit, and then maybe I was thinking about maybe stashing away a keg, because we're not brewing anything for St. Patrick's Day. I was thinking about stashing away a keg just to hang on to for that weekend. I would say like the biggest advice I get for any sort of styles like this is to like approach it with a less is more sort of mentality, which is kind of how I think about brewing in general. Is, you don't need to add 5 or 6 different kinds of malts and 3 different kinds of hops or anything like that to come out with a really clean, nice Irish beer, just like you would brewing any sort of lager traditional style. Just kind of like start brewing it with the minimal amount of things, maybe add 1 or 2 things, and then from there look to see what you can remove to kind of just streamline it and make it nice and simple.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that all the Irish beers are kind of like that anyway. They're like very simple, basic recipes, but they're very flavorful.
Guys, thanks for joining us. Thanks for just like bringing a really cool thing to talk about to this project. This was not expected, and then all of a sudden you were offering to send it, and I was like, we're thinking of a class on this exact topic. So cheers. Appreciate y'all. Enjoy your last
Cheers.
cans and kegs of Lucy's Irish Extra Stout. Big thanks again to both Brooks and Ryan for taking their time out and sharing their perspective and experience brewing Lucy's Irish Extra Stout, the recipe for which, once again, is available for download in the video description. So please grab that, give it a try in your home brewery. Also want to mention, in our full NBU course on Irish ales, we include a second pro brewer interview with Mark Hunger. He's the brewmaster at Great Lakes Brewing Company. He talks us through the brewery's award-winning Conway's Irish Ale, which is an Irish red ale, and Wolfhound Stout, which is a dry Irish stout, specifically the role that different crystal malts play in the grist of those beers. We'd love for you to take part in that NBU course, learn more about it, and sign up at the link included in the video description below.